Tanya. All right, so my first question to the panelist is what what is your land issue? What is the issue that you're campaigning about, that you're fighting for? If you could, every speaker can have 5 minutes to explain what the issue is and who you're fighting against, I suppose, who's challenging you on the issue that you're campaigning about. Some of you sound like you might have more than one issue, so feel free to do that. So if we could start with Helen, would you be willing to kick off on that one, please?
Certainly. So, just to say, the Open Spaces Society is Britain's oldest national conservation body. It celebrated its 150th anniversary in 2015, so we're now at 160th and going on. We were founded in 1865 as the Commons Preservation Society, and in fact, if you look us up in the Charity Commission, we still go under that name. Its early battles were to save commons in and around London from enclosure and encroachment. So victories included Hampstead Heath, Wimbledon Common, and Epping Forest. And then in 1895, it effectively gave birth to the National Trust by setting it up with some land and some finances. But obviously, the National Trust has become a much bigger organisation. But I represent effectively the parent organisation, and our campaign is really about public rights over land rather than public land itself to enjoy commons, green spaces, and paths. And we use legislation to talk about that. So when we talk about public land, we're not talking about something abstract or optional. We're talking about village greens, which I is my speciality for registration, commons, town parks, often held under Public Health Act or the Open Spaces Act 1906, footpaths, riversides, and open countryside, places that people rely on every day for recreation, well-being, access to nature, and a sense of belonging. For the Open Spaces Society, the core issue is the loss of public access to space, often quietly, incrementally, and without meaningful public consultation. Land is a finite resource, and over the time, the public have acquired rights of use, but once lost, they are rarely recovered. Publicly accessible land performs multiple roles at once. It provides free, inclusive access to nature and outdoor space. It supports physical and mental health, especially in urban and deprived areas. It underpins local democracy and community identity, and it plays a vital role in climate resilience, biodiversity, and flood management. Sadly, with the pro-growth agenda, the Secretary of State for MHCLG with his infamous Build Baby Build, but these values do not fall on an accountant's sheets, and they make their appreciation intangible to what I call the bean counters and the government planners. So the threats I see or I'm proposing tonight fall into four broad categories: development pressure, housing, and we've heard already from others, affordable housing is scarce. Infrastructure and commercial development are frequently promoted as being in the public interest. Yet too often this comes at the direct expense of existing public land. Safeguards are weakened. We know from the OBR that the current consultation for the National Planning Policy Framework is weakening the protections for environmental measures. Alternatives are not properly explored, and open space is seen as the easiest option. Secondly, legal erosion of access rights. Footpaths are diverted, commons, there's a means of deregistering or they haven't been registered. And in particular, footpaths, there's a upcoming cutoff of 2031, after which you won't be able to get footpaths on the definitive map unless we can repeal an act that introduced that. Bits of park are sold off or declassified. There's also access is restricted temporarily but never restored. And CPRE London did a report about the 50 parks for sale just announced last week. They appear minor, but cumulatively they dismantle long-standing public rights. Third, I'd say there's poor governance and asset disposal. So local authorities are under severe pressure. They're encouraged to sell or lease public land, even sometimes through commercial events and what I call eventification. Decisions are sometimes rushed, transparency is limited, and the long-term public value of land is discounted in favour of short-term receipts. And last, there's a lack of enforcement and public awareness. Many protections exist on paper, but they rely on vigilance. When communities are not informed, consulted, or resourced to challenge decisions, protections fail in practice. And the government is consciously de-resourcing this at the moment. So an organisation called the Gardens Trust, which is a statutory consultee, they're proposing to get rid of, and that will lose expert advice on historic gardens and landscapes for the future. And ironically, who is most affected? So the loss of public land does not affect everyone equally. It's disproportionate. People without private gardens, children and older people, disabled people who rely on accessible open spaces, urban and lower income communities with few alternatives. In other words, those who most depend on public land and public access over land are often those with the least power to defend it. And that's what the Open Society seeks to try and do, is to try and buck that trend. We provide expert legal and policy advice. We support local groups and volunteers in their campaigns. We challenge unlawful and unfair disposals, and we campaign for and lobby for stronger protections in planning and land law. And I think that covers a lot.
Thanks very much, Helen. Tanya, would you like to go next, please? So what is the issues that you're dealing with? If you could give some examples, and who is the sort of the target, who's actually causing the problems? Is it the government, local government, state government? What are the issues that you're campaigning about?
Yeah, the answer to those questions are yes. It is the government, it is the local councils, it is policy. But I think the key question is, who is development for? And what we're finding more and more is that despite there being a housing emergency, meaning that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are locked out of truly safe, affordable and secure homes, the development industry is interested in reducing the amount of so-called affordable housing it produces, and governments and councils are in this system together with them, ensuring that policy moves become much more geared to ensuring that the developers make as much profit as they can, and don't have much regard for the local community. And what does that mean in practice? It means that council estates are up for grabs in terms of regeneration, where the idea is, that a developer can come and make a proposal about how to deal with a historically underfunded and dilapidated council estate by producing homes for sale, and very little, in a lot of cases, very little social rented housing, sometimes no council housing at all. You have public spaces that are under pressure from the development industry as well. There was a piece of land that was basically council land, grass, very mature trees in the centre of Peckham that was fenced over and built on. Council housing, nevertheless, it's not just about what sort of development, it's also whether development's appropriate, and in that case it wasn't. Cultural spaces are under threat, so we've got Old Kent Road at the moment, where local cultural industries are the intention is to push them out, to make way for multiple towers of luxury, unaffordable housing with very little social rented housing within that. local traders are cleansed from redevelopment areas, from regeneration areas, like the centre of Peckham. So there's a multifaceted attack on local communities from the development industry, from government, and councils often see themselves as having very little choice but to work within that system. And I think that method of organising your local council truly has had its day. Communities are having to fight to retain what little public space, public housing, and affordable cultural spaces there are. And we're at the forefront of that. And we're very pleased in SHAPE, Southwark Housing and Planning Emergency, to be able to bring together everyone who's very concerned and wants to see a different set of priorities altogether.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks a lot. Sarah, could you go next, please?
Yeah, hi.
And if you could just say something, and maybe the others might as well. I just was wondering about who actually owns this land. Is it an issue of who's owning it, that the council is actually selling the land, or is it just a question of how the council is choosing to use the land, if that's at all relevant to what you're going to say?
Yeah, it is. So I can speak, I think, both. I'm always kind of, I guess, both Lad and Elephant and Castle, and then Protect Our Places, which is a coalition of groups that's more London-wide. And I think like Protect Our Places is very interesting because it brings together campaigns and organizations that are operating in very different land ownership contexts. And the Elephant and Castle shopping center versus Brixton Market, which has always been a privately owned market, versus Shepherd's Bush Market, which is publicly owned. There's TfL arches that are under threat. There's then TfL, ex-TfL affiliate, or maybe still TfL affiliate, Arch Company, which is its own kind of like can of worms. And I think that means that the strategies that we're using, while there are similarities, also there's a lot of differences in the conversations that we're having around land are very, very different because of that. And I think especially because even within an individual retail site under threat, there might be multiple landowners. So you're not just dealing with a single landowner who's selling, you're dealing with multiple landowners who are making different decisions about what's going to happen. I think Ridley Road is a really good example of that. And I think that, sorry, I have some notes, I'm getting a little bit lost, but I think, in the case of Elephant and Castle, for example, the displacement of the shopping center was tied to a much larger and truly public land issue with the Haygate estate. It's part of a 3-phase regeneration scheme. So the first was the Haygate, the second was the shopping center, and the third is the UAL campus. And I think that there's, it's tied to this larger scheme that justified the displacement with the construction of housing, which I also think that Tanya spoken about, where the loss of these spaces that serve these other purposes are being sacrificed as part of this push for what's really luxury accommodation, but under this like all housing is created equal mentality. And then alongside, or like mixed use development, and all uses within that mixed use development are equal. And I think that all of the groups within the coalition recognize that the threatened spaces, that they're not just economic spaces. So the purposes that they serve are far more expansive than the way that they're being framed. And also that like the spaces are particularly important for Black, racialized, and migrant communities in London, that they are being targeted those who are impacted by the targeting of these spaces and development are already disproportionately impacted by loss of land, by loss of access to land, and by other systemic harms and oppression. And I think that, like, if we are looking at public land in particular, that the main spaces under threat are traditional retail markets and arch-based businesses. But as I said, there's a lot more variation. Yeah, so retail spaces, whether they're shopping centers or town centers, high streets, industrial space, traditional retail markets, they're, you know, the reason that they're being displaced is because of speculative development. It's because of this idea that there's another more profitable use of that land than the way that it's being used now. And it's really rooted in this, you know, this idea that somebody who's probably not the communities that are reliant on these places could be extracting more value than they are. And some of that is helped along by the fact that there's, you know, limited protections for certain spaces. So high streets, for example, have very few protections in planning. There's not really a real designation. There's some stuff around like how shops are being used and how they're being zoned and what that looks like. But beyond that, there's not much. And I think fundamentally also the campaigns that are fighting them are resource and time poor. So we lack access to legal support. Commercial legal support in particular is really, really hard to come by. And nobody does it pro bono because they don't want to alienate potential clients, which are the developers who pay a lot of money into commercial property law. There's really problematic narratives of decline. So there's simultaneously a tendency to blame like online retailing, that these places are looking like they've been not cared for, which is likely true, especially in the case of, you know, when developers or landowners, whether that's the council or a private landlord, wants to eventually develop these places. The same way with housing, there's managed decline and kind of systemic neglect. And yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally there's these like deeply problematic economistic frameworks for understanding how these spaces should be used and what the proper use of those spaces, but also who's using those spaces. So what types of shopping are acceptable forms of shopping, who should have access to that. And there's kind of just, I think, a real devaluation of what those spaces offer beyond that. I don't know how much time I have left. I can read the manifesto that we've written as POP. It's pretty short. It's like 3 paragraphs.
Oops, I think I better move on to the next
That's
speaker.
fine.
Yeah. All right. It's hard to keep track of time, really, but thanks very much, Sarah. Dave, if you'd like to finish off.
Yeah, so obviously in Haringey and in particular Tottenham, there'd been, you know, going back decades, all kinds of local disputes and campaigns and battles. However, in 2011, something dramatically changed. You may all know or remember the Tottenham uprising riot as a result of the killing of Mark Duggan, which spread across the whole country, Hackney, Croydon, and out of London, and mainly as an anti-police kind of protest. And the London mayor commissioned a report from a property speculator about, you know, what was the cause of these problems that spread so quickly, and came to the conclusion that basically working class areas were too working class, and council estates should be sold off and gentrified, and that land prices and property prices were too low. So it was a kind of ludicrous report. However, one of the recommendations of the report, which was focused mainly on Tottenham, was to call for a development corporation to be set up to take control of development, particularly land in Tottenham, completely undermining the local council. The local council responded, unbeknown to the community. They responded very fast, and a kind of secretive group was set up called the Tottenham Land and Management Association or something like that. I can't remember what the name of the actual organisation was. It was chaired by the council, and the council repositioned themselves as the developer's best friend and tried to remove any pretense that it wasn't going to be fully in support of complete development around Tottenham. And they had a number of meetings over a couple of years, which we only found out about following a Freedom of Information Act request when we got all the minutes. But the council produced something called the Plan for Tottenham, which was this glossy document, tens of thousands distributed throughout the whole area, basically calling for a lot of demolition, not just of council estates, but also community centres, other public facilities.
Page 94, the Private Eye
And-
Podcast.
Whoops.
Hello and welcome to another episode of
Yes, and this was really a shock to the system for all the community groups in Tottenham that had been kind of beavering away on their own, largely in their own kind of focus, with their own focus, and we realised that to challenge this strategic plan, which was actually built around the strategy was built around the newly developed or developing Tottenham Hotspur football stadium. So that was used as a catalyst for saying, right, what we need in Tottenham is to sort out the whole area to be much more pro-development. And we realised that we would have to, all link up if we're going to be able to support each other, because small battles were becoming less and less easy to win. I won't go into exactly what happened next in any detail, because I think that's the next question. But to summarise, yes, we set up the Our Tottenham network. But in that whole process since, that was about 2013-14, the council carried on with its, if you like, demolition strategy, which they called regeneration, and came up with an even worse proposal, which was the Haringey Development Vehicle, to shift £2 billion worth of land and assets into the management control of, believe it or not, Lend-Lease, the world's most unpopular hedge fund. And the council would retain ownership, but the Lend-Lease would be managing the development of all this land and assets. That provoked an even greater response. I will explain a bit more about that later, but that was a real threat. It was actually defeated, and I'll explain about that later on. So that's the background.
All right, thanks very much, Dave. For my next question to people was, some people have touched upon it already, is when you are campaigning, what kind of strategies have you used? And how do you engage people in what you're doing? How do you manage to mobilize people? And do you make links with other organizations? And have you had any successes, do you think, from of your strategy? So let's start. Sarah, why don't you start this time?
Okay. Yeah, so POP, or Protect Our Places, is a coalition. So I think fundamentally built into the way that we operate. We are bringing together campaigns that are doing things separately at the same time. So the purpose of it is to really link what are often, I think, can feel a little bit myopic when you're in the local struggles to this larger structural story. And it emerged specifically to highlight that the retail gentrification that we're seeing in London is specifically a racialized and class issue, that the places that are being developed out and quite violently cleansed are specifically important to diverse working class communities. And the way that we operate is a little bit like almost like a spokesperson model. We have representatives from each campaign that come and meet together periodically to kind of think collectively around kind of what our vision is and what we're working towards and how we're going to be, whatever it is that we're coming together around in that moment. And then we'll go back and work locally. And I think ongoing challenge of it is like local campaigns are really resource impoverished. And so how are we not adding more work to people who are already overworked? We're really lucky we have funding for this. So we've been able to compensate all the campaigns who are participating in POP, which has been, I think, the difference between it kind of falling flat on its face from the get-go and actually becoming something that feels really powerful. And I think like part of that, I think Lad and Elephant believes really strongly in coalition work. Like the campaign in Elephant was a coalition. We're still doing stuff. We do a lot of stuff locally. We're part of SHAPE, as Tanya mentioned. Who funds POP? We are currently funded by, we're funded by a few different funders. So this project in particular for POP is Trust for London under their Racial Justice Fund. But there's other people who are doing stuff elsewhere. So Impact on Urban Health is a big funder of ours as well. They are attached to, I think it's the Guys in St. Thomas NHS Trust. It's whatever the NHS Trust that's connected to Lambeth and Southwark, and they are doing a lot of work around addressing systemic injustice, especially racialized injustice, and health injustice and social injustice. So they're doing good work there too. And then the second part of your question was about like how are we seeing success in making our case? And I think yes and no. I think, for being honest, it's an uphill battle. I think anybody who's been kind of seeing what's happening at kind of larger scale planning policy is really aware that like it just is getting harder and harder to like, for some reason, to make the case that we're trying to make, that like land should not be sold off. Places that matter to people should be protected and not sold off to developers who want to build luxury homes that will never be affordable to anybody who lives in the area. Or as they say, luxury homes, but which are just unaffordable housing. And I think at the same time, we've seen some really, really good, things and exciting things. I think part of that is like the connections that we're making with other groups across London and the way that this has felt like a really helpful way to be linking and building networks, not just between the groups in the coalition and other people within our respective networks, but being able to like, people hear about us, they'll ask about something, and we're able to connect them out to other people who might be able to support and really, I think, build a stronger, build a stronger web maybe. And we've been able to, we've had some, there's always, I think, quite, I think, genuinely interested and empathetic and like action and rather than being reactive, like really kind of affirmative local counselors in some cases. There's a few people that we've been in conversations with at the GLA level who have been really, really pushing and really trying to fight to give not just POP and not just our own campaigns, but kind of our wider networks as much airtime as possible. And I think that's been very helpful, at least in terms of like yelling at people until they seem to be maybe a little bit more aware of what's going on.
Yeah. Okay, I'll move on to the Helen, would you go next? I mean, you talked a little bit earlier about some of the things you did with your how you get people going. If you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, so we have the fortune that we're a long-standing charity and therefore have relatively stable income through members. We have an open email system where we encourage people who are having difficulties with their campaigns to come to us. My job as a case officer, day in, day out, is to provide advice and moral support, because very often being a campaigner is a lonely experience. And so part of what we think we provide is a sort of helping hand and a steer. Also with CPRE London, I produced with them a guide on the sort of basics of how to react to planning applications when you want to stop something in or around a local park. I mean, I suppose more instructive would be the second question about have we had any successes? And again, I'm going to have a yes and a no answer. Yes, in that we are prepared to and have gone to court, and we also have a very small grant scheme that is literally on the turnaround for a member, where we support legal campaigns because judicial reviews can be expensive. And so, for instance, locally, because I think most of in London, we have been behind supporting the Friends of Brockwell Park, or the Save Brockwell Park, I can't remember their actual name, challenging the local authority over commercial events being rented out in Brockwell Park. We have had a number of village green wins. I mean, there's one called the Trap Grounds in Oxford, and these are all started by local people. We've managed to encourage some local authorities. So Hillingdon, interestingly, has a policy of voluntarily registering land that they own as village greens in certain places, and that protects public rights of recreation over it. I help also people secure what I call involuntary registration. So where a private landowner has neglected the land, they haven't understood their rights under the 2013 Growth and Infrastructure Act. If you've had 20 years use over a piece of land, you can register it. There's quite a process, and you have to apply to the Commons Registration Authority, but that's what I do day in, day out, is to try and secure public rights over land. And obviously the famous one that we won last year, where we went as far as the Supreme Court, was the Dartmoor judgment, which protected wild camping on Dartmoor from private owners who were trying to keep people off their land and were having arguments about what constitutes camping and is it okay to sit on a path, or do you have to keep walking, and all of that. My colleague took that one to the Supreme Court, but we have also had losses, and I think part of our strategy is that we keep ourselves relevant. So we belong to a lot of networking groups like the Better Planning Coalition, the Wildlife and Countryside Link, and we therefore respond to all, or try to respond to all, pertinent government consultations and constantly write to MPs and other parliamentarians, so that we were able to stave off a particularly obnoxious amendment to the Public and Infrastructure Bill before it became an act, where a KC, who happens to also be a peer, was trying to undo a judgment that we had secured called Shropshire versus Day about the ownership of land being in trust from local authorities. And local authorities cannot dispose of land without complying with very unrigorous, by our standards, Local Government Act 1972 regulations. So we just constantly encourage people to come forward to us. We try and support them as best we can, and we pursue it through the law ruthlessly when we feel there's really something that's unacceptable. And by doing that and making ourselves a fully paid up member of the awkward squad, we get noticed.
Thanks very much, Helen. I think also there was the Right to Roam campaign that was quite helpful in the Dartmoor thing. So
Absolutely. Dartmoor was not just us. We happened to be the legal side of it, but absolutely, without the local campaigners on the ground who were doing things, folk singing, right to roam, beating the bounds, Guy Shrubsalt. There were lots of other people. It was a mass campaign
yeah,
over a very long, sustained period. I mean, that's the thing about campaigning is it's not for the faint-hearted. You're looking at 5, 10, 15 years. It's a lifetime.
yeah. Okay, Dave, do you want to go next, please?
Yeah, so you're all waiting to find out what happened next after this
Yes.
assault on Tottenham by property developers and the council. Well, we formed the Our Tottenham Network. We had a series of conferences open to all reps from community groups throughout Tottenham, not just campaign groups, but any community groups. As a result of which we developed collectively a charter, the Our Tottenham Community Charter, and we asked groups to sign up to it, and 55 groups, some of which were networks of groups, from churches to campaign groups to residents associations from federations and so on, signed up to this charter, which gave us the strength, the kind of political clout, if you like, to start challenging some of the emerging threats and policies. But most importantly, we would be supporting each other. So there was a commitment to support each other when there were localized battles. And I'll give some examples. We supported the people on a particular estate near the Tottenham Hotspur football ground, Love Lane Estate. There was a long campaign, maybe led by Haringey Defend Council Housing, to stop the demolition of the estate, or if it went ahead, to get rehousing for everybody. Other council estates, again, that were under threat, encourage people there to campaign against that. Ward's Corner, which was a market, or is a market, at Seven Sisters, indoor market, and some other very important buildings, was threatened over the last 20 years with demolition and rebuild as a kind of luxury gated community with chain shops. I have to say, I'm very pleased to say, after 20 years of campaigning, they beat off the developer, managed to get the council to change its policy to support them, and they are on the verge of taking over the whole area themselves as market traders in the local community. There's also was threats to green spaces, one of which was my very own Lord Shipwreck, even though it was co-managed by the community and had protections from legal covenants, and had £7 million of regeneration money spent as a result of community campaigning, and we co-managed the park as a result of all that, and we still do. There was a threat to build on a third of it by the property department, the regeneration department, Haringey Council. We saw that off. So I think that one of the other things that we did as Our Tottenham is that we had a whole conference on developing your own community plans, so that we're not just anti and on the defensive the whole time, but also we're developing our own plans of what we want to see, and then we're making demands about that's what should happen, which actually helps to mobilize people behind campaigning when there's a positive goal to be aimed for. I mentioned about the council wanting to put £2 billion of land and assets under the control of Lend-Lease. and that produced such an uproar. There were mass protests, 1,000 people. I think probably the largest ever demonstration that was specifically Haringey, limited to Haringey. And actually that led to regime change in Haringey. The main architects of this whole, 5-10 years of developer-led policy got kicked out by their own members. The Labour Party members deselected 3 or 4 key members of the cabinet that ran Haringey Council. And that doesn't mean the problems have gone away, but they've certainly subsided in terms of a mass all-out attack on public rights in the community. So, yeah, I think that's mainly what I was going to say. Yes, that we've had a lot of successes on the way. Yes, thank you.
Excellent, Dave. That's very encouraging.
There's one more area of success that we've had. Sorry, I should mention that we, as a result of our Tottenham, we set up a community centres network, Haringey Community Centres Network, because in my park, the Friends of Lord Shipwreck took over the building that was built as part of the regeneration that we fought for. And we now manage that building, and we and other centres got together because some centres were under threat. The council had raised rents to a ridiculous level. They were talking about demolishing certain centres that were in so-called regeneration areas. We set up a network, and for 10 years, we've been supporting each other as community centres, trying to get a new model lease from the local council. And after 10 years of that effort, the council are on the verge of agreeing a much better lease and rent arrangement.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Tanya?
Yeah, I remember I went to one of those demonstrations, that HDV demonstration in Haringey. It was quite inspiring, and really big. And you could tell that it was an incredible campaign. And I also remember the former council leader's face on the front of the Evening Standard, after she'd been ousted. Very funny. So yeah, well done to Haringey. SHAPE, Southwark Housing and Planning Emergency. We're all about this narrative. It says, what's the narrative you're using to make your case, as one of the questions, which is a really interesting question, because the narrative we're normally faced with is you are powerless. You cannot control what your local politicians or the national government are doing. They will do whatever they want, regardless of whether you speak up or not. And you might as well just shut up and go away. That's their narrative. And we are needing to counter that. I guess we counter it by saying, actually, it doesn't have to be like this. We have got reasonable demands. We don't believe that all the nation's resources and assets should be diverted towards ensuring that capitalists make a profit. And we think that that where development happens, it should be for people. There should be homes for people, not for profit. And one of our main demands is, in fact, our main demand is no to overdevelopment. Is it too high or is it too dense? If so, we're against it. We say that we want 50% council housing on private land and 100% council housing on council land. We don't want any fake consultations. We want genuine tenant, resident and local people's involvement in the plans. We want to stop unsafe and poorly built development. We want to stop the demolition and sell off of council housing. We're in favour of refurbishment, not demolition. We're in favour of the acquisition and the requisitioning of empty homes, of which there are 23% more than there were last year, according to Action on Empty Homes in a tweet that I saw today in London. We want to protect and improve our estates, community facilities and town centres. We want the council to employ direct labour to give workers the power to challenge unsafe building work. We want them to act on the climate emergency now, no unsafe, unsustainable building, no loss of green space, and stop the displacements of traders for unaffordable housing. That's 10 demands. And 11 organisations have signed up to those 10 demands, including the three main trade unions who organise workers in the council. The main campaign that we have been dealing with since the start of the SHAPE coalition was a long-running, years-long campaign by a group called Aylsham Community Action, and they were against the overdevelopment and the lack of social rented housing and the lack of affordable housing generally within a new development proposed by Berkeley Homes of the Aylsham shopping centre in the middle of Peckham. When SHAPE got involved, we helped Aylsham Community Action to organise, I think we've had 3 demonstrations. We had one last March, which was the biggest one, with around 600 people, which isn't bad for a local meeting. Not as great as the Haringey one, but, you know, not bad. We organised a local public meeting. We've also organised 3 protests outside the council offices. What's happening now is that Aylsham Community Action did an incredible fundraising campaign, raised £50,000 to pay for lawyers to put their case at planning inquiry. The success was that the council, despite all predictions otherwise, oh, you can't do anything, they'll do it anyway, you can't fight, don't waste your time. Despite all that narrative, the council did actually refuse that application. I've got no doubt whatsoever that if it wasn't for the campaign, they would not have refused that application. And the more than £50,000 was raised so that Aylsham Community Action could fight at planning inquiry, which happened a couple of months ago, and we are waiting for the inspector's decision on whether that application is still refused or whether it's going to go ahead. As I said, we've got 11 supporting organisations in Southwark. There's been, while the Aylsham Centre is still undecided, we are now supporting a group called Save Old Kent Road. The Old Kent Road Area Action Plan is it's like a foundation document. It's one of it forms part of the development plan. It hasn't gone to inquiry yet, so it hasn't been approved yet, but the council is proposing, as I said earlier, to sweep away lots of cultural spaces, have, multiple towers of unaffordable housing. There's local businesses and traders who are basically under threat of being socially cleansed away. We are organising a protest outside council offices on the 18th of March, and everybody's welcome to come to that. That will be at 6:30 in the evening on the 18th of March at the council offices in Tooley Street. And we are also planning a demonstration down Old Kent Road on the 25th of April, starting at Elephant and Castle and going down, halfway down the Old Kent Road, past a lot of developments that have already started and, not really for local people at all. So I think that the question is always what would happen if people didn't fight back? And I think the answer would be, as Dave talked about, the people in charge would just do what is business as usual, which is, cooperate with, very, very rich developers to reshape the area in the interests of developers' profit. And the fact that we fight back may not prevent all of the developments from taking place, may not mean that tomorrow we're going to have massive investment in council housing, but the movement itself and the various parts of the movement which we support, and we, we encourage, act as a brake on the worst excesses of the system and ultimately hold the key to transforming the system altogether.
Thanks very much, Tanya. It just seems that there are a lot of common threads through all the speakers. Coalitions and working with other people seem to be a key part of it. Getting signatures of different groups, for example, having a group like our Tottenham and Protect Our Places as well as a coalition. And there's different elements of campaigning, whether it be needing money, whether it be creating that mass base of protest and dealing with the very complicated planning system. But there does seem to be a lot of commonality between them. But we now want to focus on whether or not we can actually move even to a higher level of cooperation. Every speaker here has been involved in something where they're cooperating with others. But let's just take it on a London level. What needs to happen for us to maybe coordinate and cooperate even further to make us much more effective? So, Richard, did you want to take over the chair now? Thanks.
Oh, okay. Cheers for that. Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Richard Lee, and along with Bonnie and Tori, who's also here tonight, and Dave and Leslie, who couldn't make it today, we're like a kind of convening group for the Land Justice London. And the point I just wanted to raise before we invite the speakers back in is that the Charter for Land Justice in London that Bonnie introduced, right at the start of the Charter, the first demand is stop the sale of public land. That's the very first demand to the Charter. And what we'd like to explore with this question is, whilst it's obvious that all of the campaigns speaking tonight implicitly are stopping the sale of public land or trying to, first of all, is it explicit in your set of demands? We'd like to know that. Is it there? If you have a charter or a plan, is there a demand that says stop the sale of public land? And do you apply that if you're within a borough in London? Do you apply that across the whole of the borough, or is it just looking at particular developments? Because what we'd like to do around the land justice work is actually look at a London-wide campaign to seek to put a stop to the sale of land all over London, not just where there's a huge development that puts everything at risk, but stop it across all London. So we'd like to hear from you. Is that explicit in what you're demanding? What do you mean by public land? Because obviously it's not only local authority land, there's other public stakeholders who also own land. Are you aware of that and make use of that in your work? Do you map public land in your area? Because we find that's a difficulty for many of us to actually know all the public land holdings in our area. And finally, if we're to achieve a mobilisation across London, we actually need to be bringing together many different campaigns like yourselves at a London-wide scale. So could you let us know at the moment what sort of London-wide work you're involved in? Because that would really help us to understand better how we can move to that London mobilisation. So we've got an order. And after Dave starts, we'd then like to hear from Tanya and then Sarah and then Helen. So Dave, if you could go first.
Well, you asked a lot of questions there.
Yeah, go for it, Dave. You
But
can
I'm
manage
quite
it.
conscious of time, that we want to give time for other people to chip in. So I'll be very quick. So I think the first question is, what do we do? We need to get organised. We need to get organised street by street, neighbourhood by neighbourhood, park by park, centre by centre. And there's no movement without local organisation, self-organisation. And then we get to the borough level. I think it's essential to build networks and federations in every borough. In Haringey, we've got 10 different federations. We've got the Haringey Friends of Parks Forum that unites 65 friends groups. We've got the Haringey Federation of Residents Associations, over 100 associations. We've got Library Friends Network, Haringey Community Centres Network, Haringey Community Food Network, Allotments Forum, and so on. Again, if we're going to really fight for our interests, we need to be organised, not just locally and collectively, but also through networks throughout our borough. Then thirdly, we've got the London level. In the only two London-wide networks that I've had experience of is that the London Friends of Green Spaces network, which I think we need specific networks for specific interest groups London-wide. And there's 1,000 different Friends of Parks groups who are all working together and have done for the last 10, 15 years to strengthen the parks and protection of green spaces and community empowerment within those green spaces. And the second network is the Just Space network, which is really around the planning system and uniting a whole range of groups and networks. And the Our Tottenham has been very pleased to be part of that London-wide network, so that our voices are magnified at the London level and we can all support each other and build solidarity. I just want to say about, land has not really featured as a kind of separate issue in most of the groups and networks that I've been involved with, but they're all about land and about control and empowerment. But I will say that the Our Tottenham network, it's headed, if you like, our voices, our neighbourhoods, our communities, and we could certainly add our land as part of that kind of approach, if you like, which is that London belongs to us, which in fact is the first statement in your London Charter. London should belong to us. So it's up to us to make, that's what we should be working towards. We should be building counterpower in our communities so that we are able to say London belongs to us, and maybe one day it will do. Thank you.
And Dave, could I just check, stop the sale of public land? Is that a term that many of these groups would use, or do you think we need to work on it?
I've never seen that. so that you're bringing it into the whole picture, which is very important. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Dave. That's important. Tanya, what about yourself?
Yeah, hi Richard, how you doing? Well, my history is one of campaigning mainly against regeneration of council estates, which obviously is about retaining council housing and and the land in public ownership, which is one of the key demands of the SHAPE coalition as well. Stop the demolition and sell off of council housing, refurbishment, not demolition. And also, again, you're right, it's implicit, protect and improve our estates, community facilities and town centres, some of which will be public and some of which will be private land. So I would really echo the idea that campaigns need to be driven from the bottom up, but it is once you, I guess, begin campaigning, if I can imagine that I'm somebody who's never done it before instead of someone with a 30-year history, once I would, start to campaign about what's going on in my local area, I might quickly realise actually that this is going on elsewhere, that rather than just the local developer or the local council being, at fault and attempting to remove local people's ability to have a decent life in the area. Actually, this is a national issue. It's a London-wide issue. It's a national issue. And this is something that we recognise explicitly when we started the SHAPE coalition. Eileen Conn from Peckham Vision's in this meeting, and she might want to expand on this, but basically she came to myself and Jerry Flynn from the 35% campaign and said, we've realised that with the Aylsham Centre, that there's a clear housing issue here, but it's not just about what's going on in Peckham. We need to bring this wider, London-wide, and I would also argue nationally as well. And with that in mind, SHAPE is calling on planning organisations to join a planning block, which we are hoping to organise. We've started to send out the invitations. If you want an invitation to this planning block, then put your email address in the chat afterwards. We want it to be a block on the national demonstration for housing, which is happening on the 18th of April, which is pretty soon. And we are hoping that lots of planning focused campaigns across the country can come together with their own demands, with their own placards and banners and so on. And Just Space is already part of that. But we'd also like, I also think that, we can't just be part of the general housing movement, important though that is, because we need to link the issues of planning and housing if we are actually going to demand fundamental change. I also think that we more long term should be thinking about putting planning issues really onto the streets again. Because let's face it, planning policy must be revolutionized. It must be absolutely the opposite of what it is right now. Only mass movements can make that revolutionary change, as Dave has already pointed out. Therefore, we have to build a mass movement. And the only way we do that is supporting the local campaigns, promoting the local campaigns, raising wider questions where we all can come together, and generalizing a political radicalization in the planning world as well as in the housing world.
Okay. And just a quick follow-up. You mentioned before that you've got a charter of 10 demands. Yeah. Again, at the moment, is one of those explicitly stop the sale of public land?
No.
What? Any quick reflection? Why have we got it wrong at our end, or do you think it's something we should encourage?
Yes, absolutely encourage it. I mean, obviously we've got 10 demands. We could certainly think about adding more demands. There's been no particular request for that, but if you are requesting it and you're part of the SHAPE coalition, then we're duty bound to consider.
Okay, all right, we'll come back to that one then. All right, cheers then. Right, Sarah, I think you're next, and hopefully, can you include in what you say about the issue of different owners of public land? Because I think in your initial speech, Sarah, you mentioned this, that it wasn't just one owner, there could be several owners. So it'd be lovely to hear a bit about that and how you analyze and deal with that.
Yeah, well, I mean, private land ownership can be really hard to access information about. Especially because so many of these developers have shells, are shells themselves, and so figuring out where everything, where all the money's tied up and who actually owns what can be challenging. But I think in terms of the public land, like the groups in Protect Our Places who are operating in a context of public land ownership, so traditional retail markets, do talk a lot about stopping the sale of public land. As a coalition, we haven't put it into our manifesto or anything. I think because part of that is the focus of that is less the land and more on the loss of the complex social and cultural and economic roles that these spaces play. I don't think that means land couldn't be considered part of that. It just hasn't been explicit yet. Can you remind me the other questions, Richard?
Maybe you could just start off by looking at this at a London-wide scale.
Yeah.
Your organisation is London-wide, but obviously you have some specific areas like street markets and traders and how they link up with others. But how does POP seek to link up with other organisations London-wide to effectively stop the development agenda we've got, challenge planning policy and stop the sale of public land? Tell us a bit about how you go about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the collective stuff is a longer term, maybe a longer term piece of, like, it's a longer term thing. So I think part of what makes local organizing sometimes more sustainable than London-wide organizing is that you're dealing with one person rather than a larger systemic issue, or not one person, one like local authority, one planning authority rather than the larger systemic issue, and that can be easier to put pressure on. I think the coalition has been really helpful because it means that there is publicity that's coming from other parts of London, and embarrassing people is a really great way to call attention to the stuff that they're doing. I think a lot of what we're hoping to do is just kind of make it easier for groups who are contesting and fighting in this environment to like to support successful campaigns, so not to reinvent the wheel when we know that there's other people who have been doing this, some like in the case of Queen's Market for over 2 decades, and who have a lot of knowledge and lived experience to be sharing. I think that, you know, there's, yeah, I don't know. I think because of the diversity of spaces, this like land issue has come up in really different ways. So we've had everything from CPOs to like attempted transfer of ownership. In the case of Ridley Road, like the council itself decided to take on leases rather than like take them away from the developer who was trying to sell it. Like there's all sorts of stuff that's happened in all of these different places. So I think it's more that I don't know how. I think, to be honest with you, I feel like not particularly well equipped to answer this question, in part because of that. And I'm aware that it's a little bit of a weak point. But I do think that London-wide action, I just want to echo what Dave said around specific issues, build sustainable coalitions and sustainable work that we, I think, have to build networks with others and rely on them to fill in the spaces that we can't do ourselves. So where we're focused on retail gentrification or on these retail spaces, there are people who are doing great work around housing. And I mean, I think that this panel really shows up that there's people doing all of these things. We all have our own networks and we all have overlaps where we can come together on issues that we can feed in together on, but that like not trying to do everything at once can save us from burning out is the way I'm getting at. But yeah.
Yeah.
And
No.
in terms of London, other London-wide stuff, I mean, all of the POP folks are part of Just Space, to my knowledge, and they have their, you know, other London-wide connections as well, which I think has been really good.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks for that bit of promotion. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks a lot, Sarah. And then finally, Helen, could we come to you?
Yes, I feel I've been set up for this because we don't ever talk about public land, or we don't really distinguish it in that way because we talk about public rights over land. So to a large extent, we're not so bothered about who owns it, provided that the recreational rights that are enshrined in various legislative frameworks are properly enforced. So we come at it from a slightly different angle to the rest of the group here. Um, and and to the extent that we try consciously not to even own land. So I spoke a bit at the beginning about how the Open Spaces Society gave birth to the National Trust. One of the schisms in the open spaces movement back in time, and why the National Trust was created, was that that was all about ownership of land for the benefit of the public, and that's a charitable ownership, as opposed to us who were lobbying to maintain public rights over the land, irrespective of the land ownership. And loads of commons and other bits of land are owned by still lords of the manor and other things the moment you get out of London. I mean, it's obviously in London, it's slightly different. And I think the Corporation of London obviously owns Hampstead Heath and Epping Forest, and you can argue whether they've been good custodians or not. A lot of parks are owned by local authorities, but then also there's issues like paywalls and pay barriers, because obviously Kew Gardens is a grade one listed landscape, but there's a massive paywall for most people to get access to it. And what is your mapping? Because what I think one of your questions was about mapping. And obviously, I've been involved with a project with CPRE London and the London Friends of Green Spaces Network with Dave. And he hasn't, surprisingly today, mentioned his charter for parks, which everybody should sign up to. But separate to that, there's a project called Go Parks London, where we've been trying to, first of all, empower friends of groups across London to group together to share expertise and commonality. But also that is an exercise in mapping out what is actually properly accessible, as opposed to what is currently on the Giggle database, which shows a slightly different mapping of access land. And so again, I think there's a lot of blurring of what do we actually mean by access, as well. So I think we just approach it from a slightly different area to what you're talking about.
Could you add, Helen, a little bit about how the different green open space organisations that are central, the core of what you do, are there situations where you would find yourselves linking up with, say, housing campaigns or with street market campaigns? Could you say anything about that?
So absolutely. I mean, we deal with it's slightly different. It's not exactly street markets, but I have a case at the moment with a parish council where we believe that the parish council is denying the public its rights over land. And I can foresee a scenario where there's a local sale that the local inhabitants want to run on the village green, and the parish council is trying to block it. And so we are disputing with them their interpretation of a couple of Victorian enclosure acts, which define what you can and can't do on village greens and what counts as lawful pursuits and public rights. So I think that's what you're sort of getting at. But in terms of housing, I deal with a number of I've got a number of cases on at the moment. There's a couple of housing estates in different parts of the country where, as planning, it was promised that there would be public open space that would be managed by the private developer. And then the private developer has flipped the land and they're now trying to develop it. And the local groups are trying to register the land as village green space. Now, it's much harder, ironically, when it is owned historically by local authorities. And local authorities, they can argue that when they give the rights to the local population to use the green space on a social housing estate, that they are doing it by permission. And there's a big debate about what the difference is by permission and as of right versus by right. That it's a minefield legally. I don't have time to go into it tonight, but the point is that local authorities can redevelop green space on their estates without any encumbrance, whereas private estates, that it's much easier, ironically, to register village green status.
Okay, thank you for that and making some connection there. That's very helpful. Okay, well that completes the main contributions from the panel speakers. And for the next 20-25 minutes, we'd like to open it up to everyone else here. And myself and Bonnie are going to facilitate this process. Can I say at the start that it would be very helpful, those of you here who haven't yet said anything about what brings you here, any organizations you're part of. It would be great if you could all take to the chat in the next 20 minutes or so that we leave here with an idea about where people have come from. Maybe some of you will know some of you, but it would help if we know everyone or as many of you as possible. So I'm hoping that those who perhaps haven't said too much on chat yet, like Jules, like Jacob, like Natasha, like Seema, like Tom, like Viadi. It would be great if you could take to the chat. It can be as brief as you wish, but it would be lovely to share where you're coming from, campaigning, if that's what you do, research, if that's what you do, organizations that are relevant, because we really do want to be able to build a much stronger movement, in particular across London, but nationally as well. So to do that, we do need to understand who's attracted to these seminars, So that would be very helpful if you were able to do that. Now, in terms of opening this up now to questions, it would help if you can indicate by showing your hand, using your React or whatever it is. That would help us a lot. And if people get very shy, I've been following some of the discussions in chat already, so I'll probably bring you in to start with if people are shy. But Rich Walker, I've seen yours. You go for it.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, everyone. This has been a very inspiring panel. Really, really. And Dave, I have to say, your explanation of the last 15 years, 20 years in Tottenham was really, really good. It's actually a masterclass in that. I've got a kind of specific question and a kind of general question. My specific question is, how do you deal with councils that aren't telling you anything? And my general question is, how do you get more people to engage with what you're doing?
Okay, let's take a few. Please try and hold on to that. But I think it's rather than just bring the in after every question, let's see if we can hold a few of them and then deal with them together. Is anyone else raising, or do I need to go to the chat responses? No one's raising yet. Eileen, you said a few things in the chat about your work in Peckham, and you were saying how you found this get together very encouraging. Would you like to say a little bit about why you think it's encouraging, and what do we need to do you think, to actually take us forward, as networks on this issue?
Well, thanks very much for the opportunity. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're fine.
Well, I mean, I'm so excited. I've been a campaigner in London, in Peckham, for 50 years, 51 years actually. And so the key thing in community empowerment, which I noticed that, Dave, you've mentioned that phrase, the key thing to it is to mobilise individuals collectively to get their voices heard above the clamour of everything that's going on in the public media. And I'm so excited by what we managed to achieve with SHAPE, because it answers the point that was just raised. I've forgotten who it was, what his name was, but the guy that's just spoken before me. How do we get more people engaged? Well, this happened because what we did through me approaching Tanya and Jerry, who I knew through the Southwark Planning Network, though we'd never actually been involved deeply in a particular campaign, but I knew that they knew about planning, and I knew that they were very active in the housing world, which I wasn't. Housing had become a big issue on a particular planning issue that we were dealing with in Peckham. So I reached out to the two people that I'd discovered through the Southwark Planning Network, and it was like two drops of water that were connecting, and suddenly there was one big pool, much bigger than the two drops of water that actually connected in the first place. So as a result, we got not only housing and planning joining together, but I discovered, because I wasn't involved in the housing campaign, that there were quite different bits of the housing world that were campaigning on different bits. So there was council housing, which I knew about, there was tenants, leaseholders. Sorry, there were leaseholders in council property, but there were private renters, and there were all kinds of, and the homeless campaigns. And so they all started linking together. And what happened was, in a demonstration that we had in Peckham, I discovered neighbours in my street turned up at the demonstration that we were having locally, which had never been involved at all in any meetings or anything, though they were on various mailing lists. And so I find this business of linking networks, linking, not joining, but linking, just making connections, spreading the information, working together to do something that's visible on issues that we know are, which is what motivated me to get in touch with Tanya and Jerry. I could sense that there was huge issues and energy in the public network, public people, just people who weren't involved in anything, upset and issues about housing, and they weren't linked. And somehow we managed to find a way of linking them so that the energy was pooled and had a multiplier effect. And that was why I was actually approaching Jerry and Tanya in the first place. So that's the first thing. So what we're doing in this exercise, in this seminar, is another part of that. It's linking those of us who've got a lot of experience in this organizing in a way which I'm finding really mobilizing and empowering me just by listening to other people who understand how it all happens, speaking the same language as me. I've had all these decades of experience understanding how to do it, but it's not very widely shared except by people like us. And we're all involved in our own campaigns. So I think joining us together in this kind of exchange of understanding itself is a really crucial part of what I feel is developing the infrastructure. And recently, I think I've got so much to say that I'll just say two more things. One is that I view us now as part of what I call the human community network. Sorry, the human mycelium network. If you read how mycelium in the soil actually operate, how they exist, we're very like that. Individual cells joining together to form complex networks, which are channels of information, which go right through the network and enrich it, and they're like social nutrients. And so the more we do of this joint linking together, not joining, but linking together and creating these channels of communication, which actually are ways in which the energy should go ahead. And I've got a practical suggestion to make about your slogan, Richard, which is stop the sale of public land. Recently, as Tanya knows, I created a list of about 30 slogans, which could be on placards. And I have this image in my head all the time of some of the demonstrations I've been on, where people are holding individually little placards with particular phrases on them. And it's so powerful. And I think that stop the sale of public land, or whatever else anybody wants to say about public land, is a fantastic slogan to have on placards, which if you have a demonstration, it's one of the things you should definitely put on it. And the thing is, if you have placards like this, individuals can choose their own slogans, and that's the virtue of it, because actually there are many different ways of looking at these things and bringing all the different ways of expressing them together in one space visually. Not only is very enthusing for the people taking part in demonstrations, but for the people on the pavements looking at and wondering what on earth's going on, they get a kaleidoscope of the facets of this complicated thing. That's it. I'm finished.
Okay. No, that's fine, Eileen. There's a lot to think about there. I just because Tori, you've been sending quite a few messages saying that is stop the sale of public land really the right slogan? Do you want to take the floor, just briefly say something about that to challenge us all?
I suppose not really, but just to raise it again, I think when I first heard it, I thought, oh, blimey, that sounds huge. A really sort of very huge demand. Is it something? So I'm just wondering between the people in the different groups, whether it's the right phrase, whether we need to refine it, whether it is something people can gather. What is something we can gather around? So I'm involved in Right to Grow, and that is being very effective in just giving people who are involved in food growing in London something to gather around, with very little resource. So it's kind of thinking, does anybody, I suppose, especially on the panel, have any thoughts about, is it the right demand?
Could I explain something, Richard, first about the charter? Because I think people might have missed the original. Stopping the sale of public land, we came up with it because in a lot of the seminars that we did and a lot of talking to people, the first thing that seemed to happen first issue was that the council was selling off land. This seemed to be something that was happening, whether you're involved in housing or street markets, for example, Friends of Queen's Market. They're trying to sell the land to developers. West Ham Stadium was sold to developers. So it's been other people, whether they're a food grower, house people, street traders, all sorts of different people were saying that this was a threat with stopping the sale of public land. But so that's why it became an issue that it can't just be something that one group can rally around. It's got to be something that affects everyone. So, but you have to look at the other 5 demands of the charter, because as people have pointed out here very clearly, is that it could be public land, but it's still not used for public benefit. So really, stopping the sale of public land is almost like a very initial first step, because, okay, so it stays in the hands of local authorities. Well, they could still not use it for the public benefit. They still might not use it for the benefit of the community. So therefore, you have to go to the other demands, which are about using land for the benefit of the community, putting land into other forms of ownership, cooperative, commons, etc. The idea of community right to buy, where communities can take direct control of that land and really have control over how it's used. And then the other one's about establishing ways of community empowerment, which is land assemblies and boroughs, etc., and having an education program. So you've got to take the charter with the stopping the sale of public land is really only a small starting point, because it did seem to be a problem for loads of people that what they were fighting for was being sold off. So, but I think that there are issues with it because it doesn't guarantee, as Helen has pointed out, that you might have more trouble with your local authority than you might do with the private landowner. So really, it's about how that land is used. But we're arguing that the best thing is we want direct community control over that land and true participatory democracy in how land is used. And so this is just a sort of a small starting point, but not a guarantee for the issues that we're talking about here.
And Bonnie and
Okay,
I are on
okay.
the same group, and we talk about this in text. It's just, I suppose I'm just asking what other people feel about
All
it.
right.
Is that
That's all right. That's all right. And we are coming towards the close of the time that we set aside for this seminar. Bonnie, can I just check? Do you want us to give a minute to each of the panel speakers? Because Richard asked a question, for example, of the panel about how they deal with councils. How do they get more people engaged? Have we
Yes,
got time for the panel to come back on that one?
well, I think we should answer his questions. So yes.
Can I ask a question, Richard?
Seema, yes.
Yeah, hi. I just had I've made myself visible because I wanted to say a bit. Hi. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you all. I first of all, I do like stop the sale of public land because it's quite clear. But I think one of the reasons I think that we're hitting this problem, and I agree with the kind of analysis, is that like the councils are no longer for the people. I think that they really have such a narrow agenda, which is basically social care for children and adults, and they're struggling to fund it. So that is where a lot of the internal mechanisms of councils is causing them to make really bad decisions and move in the wrong direction. Essentially, when I worked in local government, there was a graph, and it just shows how over time, all of the budget they have is going on health and social care. So there's a need for us to also reframe care and care budgets. And this is something that Richard and I also talk about, and bring the issue of land as a mechanism of care into the agenda. And the second point I wanted to raise is sometimes the reason that councils sell the land is they don't look at community value the way communities do, and they really under-recognise it. And there's a real need for us as a big network. I'm so supportive of a lot of what was said tonight. I won't go into it again, but there's a real need for us to be able to more coherently demonstrate the value in these assets that we're interested in retaining, so that there's less ability for councils to see them as rundown spaces or rundown buildings and feel, or rundown council estates or whatever it is, and feel like it's easy to sell them off. So there's something about us capturing the benefit of value to communities. And there's also something about us recognizing the role of land in health and community community and individual healthy lives, so that they realize that the more the land they sell, the more they have a problem, which is their existing problem of having to pay for social care. So I think there's a whole stream of work in addition to what's been discussed tonight, but very, very related to these objectives you've all set out. And thank you all.
Okay. Because we don't have a lot of time left, and Rich, your questions started by really speaking up for Dave's work. I'm just wondering, Dave, briefly, if you could answer Rich's question around the how you deal with councils, etc.
Well, I'd rather deal with the second question, is how do you motivate people? Because I
Yes,
think
that's fine. Go
what you
ahead then, yeah.
need most in any movement, campaign, group is a sense of empowerment, and that we can win, and that we can involve more and more people, and you've got an end goal that is worth fighting for. And I think the first step is getting people involved. And there's an old slogan, which is, you only feel the chains when you start to move. And you need to get people involved so that they feel, oh, these are the issues, and these are the things that we can deal with, and this is the actions that we can take. Because if they're not involved, they're just spectators, and they can't really contribute. So I think the big focus should be on our communities, neighbourhoods, issues that are all around us that people feel passionate about. But the message shouldn't be, let's just lobby our council and that's the only thing we can do. It should be, how can we build strong grassroots movements for each other, where we care for each other, we discuss things, we fight for our interests, and we empower ourselves. And I think empowerment is the key, and that people should know that's what it's about, so that they feel this is something that's worth committing to, putting energy into. It's got a long-term goal. I mean, okay, abolition of capitalism and governments or whatever is a very abstract thing, but empowering ourselves in the here and now is very immediate. And I think that kind of attitude should be in everything that we do.
Okay, Dave. Yeah, that's fine, Dave.
Just finally, in terms of the language that we use, I do like London belongs to us. I like our lives, our communities, our workplaces, our land, our neighbourhoods. We should be taking ownership of London bit by bit.
Well, Dave, you've led us very nicely into what's going to happen next, because today was deliberately around what might be seen as more defensive work around protecting public land in many different ways. And we're going to have a second seminar. We haven't got the date yet, but we're planning for it to be in April. And that's going to look at precisely what you were saying there, Dave, about empowerment, about the community taking control, and so on. And I think Christine in the chat.
Richard, you've cut out for a sec.
We can't hear you, Richard.
Richard, we can't hear you.
I don't think he can hear us either. But Rich, whilst we can't hear Richard, I was going to answer your second point, or your first point, I should say, about how do you communicate with councils. Use the full tools of FOI and EIR, so environmental information regulations are very powerful if it's on environmental matters, and there is a duty on the local authority to respond to your inquiry.
My voice has gone, has it? No good.
No, you're okay.
You're
I'm
back.
okay now. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I was just moving to a conclusion, really, because we're up to time now, and I was trying to say that Dave's passion around we need to be in control is exactly what we're going to look at in the second seminar. And also that would include the commons, which Christine talked about in the chat. We're absolutely alive to this. And we're going to concentrate on the alternative community control in the second seminar in April. Before that, we're going to have an in-person get-together, which we've arranged, which is on Saturday, the 28th of February. We're going to hold it at the Mayday Rooms, which is on Fleet Street in central London, if you haven't been there before. And we're going to concentrate on the theme of tonight to begin with. And we want to look at what practical actions we can be taking, how we can pick up on the question of London-wide mobilising, as well as supporting the local campaigns work. But we want to look at practical solidarity, practical actions. And it would be great if many of you would like to come. So this is 2:00 onwards, Saturday afternoon, the 28th of February. At the Mayday Rooms, and we will of course send out the invitation reminder to everyone who came tonight and our general list. But it would be great if you got in touch with us and said, yes, definitely want to come, and we'd like to speak, and we'd like the agenda to cover the following issues. That would be wonderful for us, so that we've got more collective activity together about that. And that's, for us, this is part of our aspiration for this charter for land justice across London. And we might have to develop this quite a bit, judging from tonight's discussion. But our idea at the moment is that having a London-wide charter for land justice does strengthen all our mobilisations. It's not instead of, it's a strengthening, and it shows how there are so many of us across London resisting what's happening and seeking to take control. But why not demonstrate that across London and actually show our strength? So that's some of our thinking behind having a charter across London for land justice. And we would like, at the end of the first 3 seminars, we've got an aim of we want at least 100 signatories. We've got about 12, but we've only just started this. It's early days, but we'd like to get from 12 to 100 during the seminars. So please consider if your organisation could be a signatory to our Land Justice Charter. You think definitely give an alert now, but I know most of you would want to take it back and discuss it. But we'll be coming back to you, and we really do want to build up and really increase the signatories behind the charter. So I think that's pretty much it. And I don't know, Bonnie, if you wanted to say any closing words, or if I've covered it okay.
You've covered it fine, Richard. I'm just typing in the email address and the website. And
okay, then.
Thanks to everyone for coming. And it was really
thank you. It's been a great evening. You've made it, and please stay involved with us. That would be wonderful.